Hey, what's going on, everybody? Today is May 9th, 2024. You're listening and watching the dailyaishow live. And today we're talking about evaluation, specifically about multimodal models, but we're going to keep the conversation probably a little bit more broad. Talk about the importance of what evaluation prompts or models do, why they're so necessary. And we're going to talk a little bit about what a company, REKA, REKA.ai, has been doing in the multimodal space. So before we get into all of that, let me tell you who we have today. We have Jyunmi, Andy, Eran, and Brian. And I think this is like sort of a well overdue topic, right, guys? Because, we've talked, I don't know, since last year when Beth and I were teaching the AI Exchanges intro to like prompting course. Evaluation models was the last part of that. And when we would talk about it, it's evolved since then, but it was really just the simple idea of writing prompts that had the specific goal of evaluating other prompts. So how good or how bad is the output? Now, in the months since then, and custom GPTs were probably out a little after that course. I know I have personally written multiple custom GPTs whose sole goal is to look at the outputs of other either custom GPTs, complex instructions that I'm writing, or whatever the case may be. So evaluations are certainly not a new idea, but I love what some of these companies like REKA are doing. We can get into that. So I don't know who wants to kind of kick this off. Who's got some thoughts on this? Andy, usually you're one of our leading experts when it comes to understanding this. So why don't you kind of break this down for us a little bit, and then we'll dive in.
Sure. So this is in the general area of comparative evaluation of model performance. And I'm going to start at the top level of that and just speak to how do we, there's a proliferation of models out there, large language models particularly, and there's hundreds and hundreds, like 500, I think, open source models, and then there's the major players. And all of them need to be understood as to how well they perform. And then I'll drill down to what you're talking about, Brian, which is, it's like LLMs evaluating LLMs output in order to refine prompting and context.
Yeah, that's the smaller level, right? Not you have the global, and then you have the smaller use case, right? Yeah,
that's right. So we're going to drill down to that. So let's start with just the various ways that you can do comparative evaluation of large language models. Okay, so first there are metrics that you can apply to the output without really doing much comparison. So perplexity is one of them. Perplexity is how well the LLM predicts the next token in a sequence. And so that would be used internally as a measure. And the lower the perplexity, the better the performance. Perplexity means, okay, this LLM was confused, right? Perplexed by that and didn't bring out the next token. Okay. And then another one is GLUE, GLUE, for General Language Understanding Evaluation. And it's a set of questions and tests that the LLM has to go through. There's a similar one called BLUE, which is Bilingual Evaluation Understudy. And that one is particularly measuring how well the model translates, which is an important skill, obviously, when you're asking it questions that require full understanding of all the different languages, including code. That the LLM can perform with. Okay, so those are just some examples. There are others, and they're all kind of testing issues like semantic similarity in the outputs and so on. Then there are benchmarking methods, and benchmarking methods are like MMLU, Massive Multitask Language Understanding, and it's a big set of like thousands of questions that the LLM has to answer. And that's just one of them. I can't even go through the host of acronyms and possibly remember them. But the issue that comes up with these benchmarks that are used to compare large language models on leaderboards is that over time, there's this principle called the Goodhart's Law, which is any measure that's used as a target instantly becomes a bad measure because it's going to be gamed. There are going
Right.
to be like what's emerging is that there's recent news actually that some researchers just not discovered but just determined that the questions that some LLMs, not all, but some LLMs had been training to the tests. So they show up on the leaderboards, but they may not have as broad a capability in general reasoning and response output as they appear to by comparison to other models that without such targeted training perform similarly on the benchmarks. So again, we're in this area of benchmarks. Now benchmarks, when you look at the leaderboards, the difference in the percentage, if you will, of performance is measured in very small single digits and even tenths of a thing. But it's still nonetheless a feather in the cap of the developers and the trainers of these models if they can get to the top of the leaderboard. Okay, now we get to what there's two others that I'll talk about. One is human evaluation, and this is really important because humans have a more let's say less targetable. They can't be gamed quite as well because if you use a very large group of humans all providing somewhat subjective scores that are comparative, then that's it's a more effective evaluation, the benchmark, if you will, simply because if you use a very large numbers like the wisdom of crowds, you're going to get a pretty good evaluation across something more than just the target measures of the benchmarks. And then we get down to what Brian's talking about, which is automatic evaluation with LLMs. So that's the LLM as a judge. The judge, we use a capable LLM to automatically evaluate and compare the open-ended outputs from another one. And so that gets to REKA. I haven't studied REKA, so I'm going to turn it back to you, Brian. That's the overview of evaluations in comparative analysis of LLM performance.
Yeah, I mean, we can definitely let's just bring up REKA's paper. They did a paper. They have a blog post about it as well, and they call it Vibe-Eval. So Vibe-Eval, and that's their evaluation model. And let me just bring this up because it's actually some really cool stuff. And they're not the only ones doing it, but they kind of came to mind as we were looking at this topic, and I think they're doing some interesting things. So in this particular case, they're saying Vibe-Eval, a new open and hard evaluation suite for measuring progress of multimodal language models. So just for our audience, real quick, multimodal means beyond text to text. In fact, I'll show you in the playground here in a second. It can be video to text. It can be audio to text. It can also be the reverse of that. So multimodal just means going into different areas outside of just your typical text in, text out. That we sort of started our language model journey with, if we go back to like late 2022. So here they have an image, and I'll just explain it to anybody who's just listening. You don't need to see it, but basically it's like a tropical setting. It's houses, almost like Margaritaville style houses on a slice of water. It looks like it's in the tropics, but in the picture, very sort of faintly at least, the palm trees are spelling the word good. The houses and palm trees sort of make out the letters vibes. And then in the water, sort of in the ripples of the water, it says only. Now, I'll even tell you as a human evaluator, I have to like adjust my eyes to look at this. I'm like, does it say good vibes? It's like one of those, magic doc back in the day where you had to cross your eyes and look at it from a certain distance, right? So this is a tricky picture because what we're looking at for the multimodal models is like, can you see good vibes only? And so they show a golden reference where it says there's a hidden message in this image that says good vibes only. The word good is made out of the leaves of the palm trees. The word vibes is hidden among the greenery, and the word only is formed in the darker patches of the water, which I wish I'd read that first. It was a better explanation of what was going on in the picture. I just sort of started with the golden reference. And then they talk about their model, REKA Core, same company. And they're saying like the image features the word only written in large language. So basically it's saying it didn't get everything right. And then they have their evaluator. And they're saying the assistant response only identified the word only in the sand, while the ground truth response revealed that the complete hidden message is good vibes only, using various elements in the image, such as palm trees, greenery in the buildings, and darker patches of water. Therefore, the assistant response did not correctly match the ground truth, and he gave it a rating of 2 of 5. So they've used Vibe-Eval is comprised of 269 ultra high quality image text prompts and their ground truth responses. So in other words, these have been trained to say, this picture says good vibes only. That's the ground truth. That's the full truth of it, let's say. And then it's using these 269 image to text prompts and using them to then evaluate other models, other multimodal models. And if we scroll down here, we can, nope, not that page. Give me 1 second. Share this tab instead. So if we look here, we can see the multimodal input capabilities, and they're showing where REKA Core compares and contrasts against GPT-4 or Claude Opus or Sonnet, Gemini Pro 1.5, Gemini Ultra, which also does very, very well. You always see Gemini Ultra tends to get very, very high remarks. And what's kind of cool here, to be honest with you, considering it's free, is their REKA Playground is free. And so I can share that with you really quick as well. So I just did this earlier this morning. I logged in. I was like, well, maybe it'll ask for pay or whatever. It doesn't. It's actually free. It's limited to like 4,000 characters and things like that. And what I did just to start out with, since it is multimodal, is I said, I imported a very short video. I just finished a whole course for sales professionals about intro to prompting. Okay. So I have a lot of like 70 different videos, and most of them are pretty short. Hey, we're talking about this topic or that topic. So I just grabbed one and I said, can you help me understand what this person's talking about in simple terms? And I will say I was impressed with the speed that it came back with and its ability to really kind of understand and comprehend this 39-second video. It says, yep, the person appears to be talking about ChatGPT. I even like at the end here, the speaker seems to be addressing an audience interested in learning how AI can be applied and improved sales leadership and management. Exactly right. Of course, it's just a very small clip of a much larger language. And then I didn't get a chance to run this one, but I was going to say, you'll like this one, Jyunmi. Can you evaluate this thumbnail and tell me how it might be improved for YouTube? And so we'll just I just threw up one thumbnail. It happens to be about the time we talked about Zapier Central, and it was our honest review. And the image is I had this image of Toy Story, and you've been chosen in the claw machine, and so that was what was in my head, and so that's what I went with. So we're getting an answer back now, and it's giving us responses on contrast and color, the text hierarchy. The most important text should be the most prominent. The dailyaishow logo and the Zapier logo are quite large, but the main title, our honest review, could be larger to ensure viewers understand the focus of the video at a glance. Then it goes on to talk about clarity and simplicity, preview of context, call to action, branding, consistency, and so on and so forth. So, looking at this image, it's doing a pretty good job. Let's see if it was able to pull out is busy with multiple elements, including robots, the claw, and the text. So it's doing a different, by the way, there's 2 claws in this image. I didn't have time to edit one of them out. So it looks kind of silly to begin with. But my point to it is it's doing a good job of coming back and giving answers. Now, this is just REKA Core. What it would have to be then put against Vibe-Eval, I just want to make sure I'm saying that, Vibe-Eval against those 269 ground truth prompts in order to evaluate this. And then REKA Core is saying, or REKA is saying, we would evaluate REKA Core against all other models, Gemini, all the other ones, to determine whether the answer that came back for REKA Core is close enough to the ground truth, whatever we would have put in there as the evaluation as the human, to say, this is in fact what's going on in this busy picture. There's text, there's a ton of robots, there's 2 claws for some weird reason, there's a logo, there's 2 logos in there. There's a lot going on in this particular picture. So I just wanted to talk about REKA because I thought it's really cool what they're doing. They're certainly not the only ones, but they do a good job of explaining why they're building these evaluators, why they think they're important. Because they say come up with a diverse set of difficult prompts is a challenging endeavor. It's also something that cannot be easily explained to typical annotators, since they're not calibrated to the state of the art in multimodal reasoning. To this end, our prompts are created by ourselves, actual AI experts, who have a strong familiarity with the performance of frontier models. Notably, our construction of hard prompts is particularly guided by the inability of REKA Core and some other frontier models to perform the task. So it's interesting, right? Because what they're saying is hey, we created REKA Core, which is our sort of intro to making a LLM model, but we also don't think it's actually good enough. So we also created this Vibe-Eval, and we're going to put our model up against it in order to make our model better, but we're also going to put it up against the other ones in the groups, like your Geminis and stuff like that. Just super cool stuff. I love the idea of these evaluations.
Yeah, without having looked at what the benchmark tests now are for multimodal, understanding. So image understanding and sound, the audio track as well. It could be that most of the benchmarks have only to do with text at this point.
It might, yeah.
And that there wasn't a really good evaluative benchmark for what REKA is focusing on, which is multimodal reasoning. So I thought it was very interesting that now to learn that they not only developed a very high performance model for multimodal, but they also needed to develop an evaluative metric that showed just how comparable their delivery to the marketplace is compared to the most advanced multimodal models. And because there apparently wasn't an equivalent test out there. And so these benchmark tests are really, as is the example with REKA, just creating a number of images for multimodal in this case that have certain tricky things in them that have to be tested against the multiple models and see which ones of them can catch it and which ones of them can't. So this raises another point, which is really important, which is, again, thinking back to this problem of benchmark question leakage. Like if this set of images gets leaked out there, then somebody else can train a model just for those particular images. So any kind of benchmark test has to be constantly evolving and changing, just like the SAT does, right? You can get examples that are like the questions that you're going to get on the SAT, but it's going to be filled in with a lot of new questions that have never appeared before, that are quite similar to other ones. But in order to make sure that you haven't just trained, I remember this one, the answer is D.
Right. Yeah. And I just wanted to bring this up because I literally clicked on this as you were talking, Andy. So, and I know, Jyunmi, you had some points on this, but this is actually their GitHub page. I didn't realize when probably the first 3 times I looked at this, that in fact, the Vibe-Eval is available through their GitHub. And so you can actually download the data set stored in the JSON file, gives you a little bit about how to run it. And actually it does have a leaderboard right now with Gemini Pro 1.5, having, it looks like the top score, if I'm reading this right, all, I guess, hard versus normal. REKA Core, they have coming in 3rd. But they also have REKA Flash and REKA Edge. REKA Flash is a lightweight model that actually can be run on devices. And REKA Edge is somewhere in the middle, or it's above Core. I'd have to look to see which one's which. But anyway, just wanted to bring this up really quick. And the other thing is, what you remind me of, Andy, is, you used the name for it, the kind of test. I'm going to call it, it's not a firefighter story, believe it or not. It's a CrossFit thing. Because you'll appreciate this, Andy. You kind of come from this world a little bit. So with CrossFit, it's all about testing the unknown and unknowable in order to create the world's fittest man and woman. Every single year, they open it up to the world. CrossFit says, look, we don't care if you do or don't do CrossFit. You have to do these preliminary workouts. It's leaderboard-esque. The cream of the crop rides at the top. And then once a year, usually in Madison, these particular last couple of years, we are going to test the fittest on earth to crown the fittest. And this will be done through known and unknowable. But to your point, Andy, CrossFit has become a worldwide thing in sport. And there's definitely movements that are not unknowable. They're definitely like wall ball or clean and jerks or whatever the case may be. And so, of course, you now run into this same problem you're kind of doing. It's the analogy I think of is, how do you continue to train to the unknown and knowable? How do you continue to find truly the fittest on earth? And that means you have to throw some curveballs in there that they couldn't have potentially trained and optimized for, such as throwing wall balls to a 20-pound wall ball to a 10-foot target. That's something you can train heavily for and get down all the micro little movements and where your weight sits on your feet in order to get really, really good at that movement. Does that now become still a great test of overall fitness if you can train to it? So when you were talking about it, I was like, oh, this sounds like CrossFit and the entire problem with trying to crown the fittest.
I'll just provide a rejoinder to that, and then we got to go to Jyunmi. But yes, there was a television show that my daughter introduced me to, which is a Korean show where they have different superb athletes. A great long jumper, an Olympic fencer, and they all go through. And then there was one guy who was a CrossFitter, right? And they go through an elimination process over many, many, many weeks, and they're doing these really bizarre physical, trials, and they're all invented, and they're really incredible and crazy. But ultimately, the person who won the entire program was a CrossFitter. And so it could be that the introduction of constantly unknown challenges to your fitness and your capability to perform, that is what leads to the most versatile performer and the winner. Go ahead.
Yeah. Go for it, Jyunmi.
I want to say that I want to channel a tiny, tiny little bit of cynicism here, and that REKA releasing this, although I'm fully on board with the idea of having a way to benchmark these different tools, but you just have to wonder, how much is the benchmarking tools sort of skewed a little bit to help with their results, which at the end of that, and I come from an IT background, so I'm used to doing computer benchmarking. And when I used to sell computers for a living, it was all feeds and speeds and just numbers in a chart, and it was who had 1 point or 2 points better than the other person, and supposedly the best computer won. A lot of it was just really about how to sell a product, but I wonder whether it's actually maybe it's had a little bit of a bias, which is why they're number 3 on the list against a couple of really big players that are obviously much bigger than them.
Sure. If you create the evaluation model, it's got to be a little bit easier to adapt to that evaluation. That's fair. That's a fair assessment of it, and worth mentioning for sure. Yeah. By the way, I'm going to throw while you guys.
Against the idea of benchmarking, I think it's got some value in it, and it's a good way to. I think one of those charts you showed it's a good way to sort of get an idea of where things sit, because it's really difficult to evaluate an LLM for the average human being. So it's great to have a selection of tools to do that, but how effective or how unbiased theirs is, I don't know.
Yeah, I threw this. Greg asked on the question, so I just wanted to throw this up. Greg said, "Where do we find the leaderboards?" Greg, I found it on the GitHub site, but basically, if you go to REKA.ai, you can kind of find the links very quickly to all this. That's all I did. But if you need it, it's the GitHub /REKA-AI /REKA-Vibe-Eval, or just go to REKA.ai and it'll be pretty quick to the GitHub. And if you scroll down on that page, that has the leaderboard that I was just showing on screen. So I just want
that's the REKA Vibe-Eval thing, but I think Greg's asking the more general question about where these leaderboards are, and that's on Hugging Face.
Oh, okay. Yeah. You mean for all LLMs and stuff?
Right.
Okay. Yeah.
There's all the tests that are out there. Like they have all different kinds of tests against the leaderboard, or for the LLMs on the leaderboard.
And the other major site is LMSYS.org. That's where the arena is, and where you can evaluate have the human testing for or evaluation for various models as well.
Tell me what it is real quick, Jyunmi, and I'll pull it up while you're talking.
LMSYS.org, LMSYS.org.
Okay.
So the only little thing I wanted to add to this is a little more on the significance of having this evaluator available, because like you said, Brian, it's on GitHub. Anybody can access it and use it and things like that. Because it kind of goes to what you were saying, Andy, where this helps fill in a spot that doesn't have a lot of work in, right? It doesn't have a lot of available or publicly available testing and evaluation for any model. So this will help particularly open source developers do evaluations in the multimodal space. So I think it's significant. I think it's very significant that they release this paper and they releasing this model out there so that people can start using it to evaluate everything out there. Also, it does allow more independent evaluation, because we have seen over the last 24 months where companies, and sort of like what Eran was saying, is oh, here, let's put our best foot forward, or let's show ourselves in the best light. And what all the big ones do. That's what Google does, OpenAI, and whenever they're like at the top, or there's like, oh, look, we're the best ones now, and Claude 3 is the best one. Sure, everyone's going to try and make their model shown in the best light, but having independent evaluators and independent reviewers will solidify that credibility or the value there.
Yeah, so let me thread off that.
Where we compare A versus B and C and that. I mean, it's everywhere. We do it with our students at school. We do it in you go to buy a car, you pull a list, compile a list of specifications. Comparing airline ticket prices. So, I mean, there's no reason why we wouldn't have something like this for an AI system. But as I said, it's just a more complex thing to do a measure on. So it's good to have something like this, I think, at the end of the day.
And I just
so
want to point
as an independent developer of a test, you can be your own tester of multiple LLMs. And you do that in effect by doing prompt comparison, comparing a prompt that you want to use across multiple models. And there are a number of prompt management platforms that allow you complete access to pretty much open source and all the major models if you have API keys for them. And you can take a single prompt, it's basically clone it across all those models and see what the output is and compare them. And I've done this just principally between OpenAI and Anthropic with prompts that I want to use in various applications. And sometimes the prompt, I have this understanding that, I really like to use Claude 3 Opus in general because it does this and that, but I'll take a certain prompt and, GPT-4 Turbo does way better on that particular prompt than Claude does. And so I'm never really fully confident that you can just go to one model and it'll work. So all of this evaluation of LLM outputs goes from the highest level, of that framework that I started out on the show with, all the way down to you as an individual comparative tester have to evaluate your prompts against multiple models in order to really get the optimum output from an LLM. And then you can include that particular model in some workflow sequence where the prompt that you're using and all of its antecedent content and context gets fed to that tested model, the one that's tested on your prompt that does in your human evaluation of it the best job.
And what would you recommend for someone who wants a tool to test across multiple platforms? What do you use or what do you like?
Well, I have to give a shout out to it's an expensive paid model, but Vellum allows you to do that against all kinds of different ones. But there are others like the platform Respell that many of you guys have used in order to use prompts against workflows that accomplish multi-stage efforts. That allows you to pick from a wide range of models and insert them, and you can have in the same workflow different models. Like, this step uses ChatGPT 3.5 Turbo because it's really cheap to do that, and they don't require a lot of advanced reasoning. But down here at the end, when I'm asking for analytical evaluation of something, then I'm using Claude 3 Opus or Gemini, Advanced, that sort of thing.
Yeah, and I want to throw just a quick hierarchy on this too for anybody who's listening and thinking about like, oh, I don't know, maybe you have people listening who are like, oh, I've never really thought about evaluations. Maybe I should start doing that. Yes, but here's what I would personally say. Spend more time up front really optimizing that initial prompt, because what you don't want to do is jump to evaluations of a particular prompt that isn't fully baked. And by that, I mean that it's very common to have a prompt that, the answer is okay, but then you keep tweaking that prompt. And, I always go back to the scientific method. It's constants and variables. This is always the way I explain it to my clients is, look, you want to go back into that prompt. You want to tweak one thing. If it's like giving a good example, your base level of evaluation is just at that prompt. It's not what other models might also run this prompt better, because what you probably don't know at that level is whether that prompt is good enough yet. So there's sort of a like fully baked out prompt where you can say, you know what, I'll use a sales example because that's what my brain is usually in. I'm trying to do research, I'm doing prospecting, and I want to know about pain points of so-and-so, whatever. That's what the prompt is there for. And then you've modified it. You've tweaked a little bit of the word here or there. So what if I added this line? What if I removed this line from the prompt? Ooh, I do like that answer better. And then you run it through 5, 10, 15, 20 times. And you start thinking to yourself, okay, this prompt is pretty consistent. I'm now using it. I haven't tweaked it in a while, and I'm getting consistent results. I would also say, if you have coworkers or other people, do they also get consistent results? Because there's always a possibility that there's some bias with the way that you speak to it, and you may be getting higher level results than somebody else who maybe has never seen that prompt before. So that's base level. Like, that's where I would tell people to start. If you really want to start with evaluation, start with a prompt that you endeavor to put in your prompt library. And then what I would say is take that, and then maybe you're going to move off to building a custom GPT off of it, because you're like, hey, this prompt is solid. I want to use it over and over again. Now, if you're at that level and you've used it many, many times and it's quality, I'm going to say absolutely what Andy is saying too. Now it's time to go test it, because you're only in one LLM more than likely. If you're using ChatGPT, just recently they've started saying ChatGPT, OpenAI, may select 3.5 or 4 on your behalf, depending on what the prompt is asking for, in order to cut down costs for OpenAI as much as it is for the end user. So that is its own level of it, right? But you're still in that ecosystem of OpenAI. And so I would say at that point, I would recommend to people, you got a good prompt. You feel confident. Other people have used it and they've gotten good results from it. Great. Now it's time to put it up and see if perhaps Claude Opus or other ones that you might have access to, there's plenty of free ones out there, perhaps gives you a better result. And then you start looking at that evaluation at that level. I would just be cautious about jumping to taking any prompt and looking at it in 4 different places if the prompt itself isn't fully baked out. You're muted, Andy.
I want to add that I mentioned Respell, which is a platform, but it's not likely to be used by general, individual contributor business persons. But I think Poe is an example of one where you can gain access to multiple models, without a heavy, expensive subscription.
That was the one I was trying to think of. I'm going, which one was it? I've seen it before.
So, Poe from Quora is a good alternative if you wanted to play with this idea of addressing a prompt to 2 different models, or 3 or 5, and see what the differences are across those outputs.
And I would say, do we collectively agree that this is the path going forward, that we will just continue to see either inside company, like meaning inside Microsoft, Anthropic, OpenAI, Gemini, Google, they're going to continue to have their own, they already do, but continuing to mess with evaluations internally, and that we won't, as the end user, necessarily see that. And then also that there will be continue to be more external tools, like you were talking about, Andy, where this starts to become a little bit more of the norm, where maybe in the not too distant future, you don't go to ChatGPT and write your prompt, that you do in fact go to some other landing page and you write your prompt there, and it's going to be run through different evaluations and models that you may not necessarily see as the front end user. And that's totally fine if it's giving you a better result on the back end. And you kind of go, because I'm imagining a lot of people are going to go, I don't care what what API it runs through. I'm just trying to get the absolute best answer I can get consistently. And if that's the goal, do I care which one I'm in?
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of open source projects that specifically allow you to load multiple LLMs for that kind of testing, so that you can always just access the right model for the right job, I guess, the right tool for right job. So there's like Olama and GPT for all and those kinds of things. And this has all been in the open source realm.
Right.
I would like to see one that's fleshed out a little bit more, so that it's just easier for the average person who's trying to do some prompt engineering for whatever their subject is, but have that readily available, local install, all of those kinds of things, having those elements so that everyone can do their own vibe check.
Yeah, let me add that when you write your prompt, that's not the limit of what is sent into the inference. It's not the full set of compiled tokens that goes in. And every single model has a different system prompt that gets tacked onto yours that then goes in. And so those are changing, right? Those aren't a part of the pre-training. Those are actually in context prompt content that goes in alongside yours, which is what may give rise to big differences across those. I want to mention just a couple of others that I asked Perplexity about. One of them is called Eden.AI, which offers multiple AI API access on its platform across the board, like open source and paid models. And there's another one called Prometheus, a prompt engineering independent integrated development environment. I'm sorry, that leverages a system that connects to almost any LLM provider, so that you can, as a prompt engineer, automate and evaluate the performance of the various LLMs that you might include in a workflow.
Yeah,
and I think we'll just end real quick on this.
What you're used to, you can put the same prompt into 10 different LLMs. You'll always probably get something different back anyway. Part of it, I think, is kind of which one you kind of get used to and kind of like the output that you get from. Like a lot of people love Claude. I still generally prefer ChatGPT for whatever reason. I just feel that for me, it's a better response. But I'm not saying there's anything wrong with Claude. It's just that it's not something I get the response back I'm looking for, I suppose.
Admit it, it's because it doesn't call gum or sunglasses sunnies, right? It's the Australian. It doesn't have the Australian vibe to it, Hey, I want to give, as we're just wrapping up because we're going to wrap up here, but I want to give credit where credit's due, because Eran, you brought this up and we're like, if REKA's kind of building their own evaluation model. I will say this, because this is just what I have up on the screen is LMSYS. This is what Jyunmi recommended. And I made my way over to the leaderboard. If you look at the top of the screen, there's 95 models that are being evaluated or graded, I guess. And there's over 1 million votes currently. And unsurprisingly, at the top is GPT-4 Turbo, which has been updated through 12 of 23. But if we just come right down here to number 7, so number 7 of 95 models is in fact REKA Core. So just wanted to give them a little props there. That's not too shabby. If you're number 7 on the big old leaderboard with 1 million votes, I think that's pretty impressive to be in that position, especially if it's their first attempt. So we'll leave it there. Tomorrow is our 200th episode. We hope to have all 7 of us here so we can talk about all the fun stuff. So tomorrow's gonna be a super fun show. Please come on back and hang out with us and celebrate a little bit along the way. We'll talk about, some of our plans going forward, as well as looking backwards at some of our favorite shows, which aren't necessarily the ones that hit or missed in terms of viewers. That's the way it always goes. So we'll talk about some of those that maybe missed the mark, or the ones that surprised us, because you never know. We're learning right along the way too. It's just 200 points of data, right? All right, that's still tomorrow, guys. Come on back and hang out with us. Thanks, Andy, Jyunmi, and Eran for the fun conversation about evaluation models. We'll see you guys tomorrow.
Sure, 199 is a wrap.
That's it.
Aloha.